Hello and welcome. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about writing. But first, I would like to share a couple of things with you. I do have a plan for the upcoming videos, and I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, you know what might be fun? What if we world build together? So after today's video, I'm looking at making maybe a 20-part video on building a world. Should be fun, right? I also have several videos on faith, which I have got written up on my phone. When I say written up, I mean bullet points. Usually I don't actually read from my phone. It's just my thoughts jotted down, and then I do my very best to remember them, like I'm doing today. And going from there, and then I check back and go, oh, yeah, I want to talk about that. I probably should have spoken about that. I forgot, but that's okay. So that's the upcoming schedule. Probably. We'll see. And I haven't forgotten about the RP either, the roleplay game. Still putting the final touches on that. We're going to begin playtesting soon. We're going to record some of that. I'm going to put it up on the channel. It's going to be a lot of fun. But on to today's video. So I wanted to talk to you about voice. Now, those of you who are writers should probably already understand this, but just in case you don't, everybody has a unique voice. Now, I'm talking to you right now with my voice, and you hear my tone. Now, what I hear is very different to what you hear. And I don't actually like hearing my own voice recorded because it doesn't sound the same to me. What I hear is from kind of in here, and I can feel the vibrations of my voice. And so this changes how I hear my voice. Well, what does that have to do with writing voices? Well, everything actually, because you have a unique writing voice. In fact, you probably have more than one. Now, I'm a creative writing coach and a consultant and an editor, and I help people develop their writing. And something that I tell my students is you have about 3 voices. Most people possibly have more, but you have a minimum of 3 voices. Well, what do I mean by this? Well, first of all, there is your writing voice. And so you're sitting at your computer with your keyboard in front of you, or you're sitting down with your pen, and you are writing or you are typing. And the voice which you might hear in your head, or the voice which comes out, that is distinctive. And so if you're blogging, you will have a different voice to if you're writing poetry or if you're writing prose, probably. Now, there are always exceptions, but generally, if you're writing an email or if you're writing a text, it's going to sound a little different than if you sit down. And you could say, well, that's just narrative style. But I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to say that's your voice. That's your writing voice. But then you have your reading voice. So you come back to a piece of writing and you start reading it. And maybe it's been sitting in a drawer for 3 months, or 6 months, or 9 months, or a year, or 10 years, and you start reading it. And the voice which you read it with is going to be a little different to the voice that you wrote it with. And if you start editing it, that will sound a little different too. But let's talk about that reading voice. What you read in here and your reading voice from your mouth, not always going to be the same. At least not in my experience. Now, maybe for you, it is exactly the same. Maybe your reading voice and your inner reading voice are identical. But generally, when I read something aloud, it's different to when I read it in my head. So this means when I come to edit it, which voice do I pick? Do I pick my writing voice? Do I pick my editing voice? Do I pick my inner reading voice? Do I pick my outer reading voice? Because how I read a thing determines how I edit it. Where do I put my pauses? Where do I put my punctuation? Where do I emphasize words? So, this is very, very important. So this is my advice to you. Advice number one, piece of advice number one. Choose which voice you are using and stick with it. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to start ping-ponging between all of your different voices. If you read it aloud, you might start scratching words out. But if you read it in your head, you might hear something else, and so you start changing it. And then you come back to writing it, and that's another voice. And so it can become very, very exhausting listening to all of your different voices. So pick one voice and stick to it. So this is part one of the video. But part two is potentially a little controversial. So there's this little thing called fashion. And I'm sure you've heard of it. I'm sure you've experienced it. And fashion, strangely enough, changes. And in the last few decades, it seems to have sped up. If you go back to, say, the medieval period and you look at their clothing, there is a huge amount of variance just in one nation. And of course, one nation is affected by other nations. But the high Middle Ages are different to the low Middle Ages. And what is commonly known as the Dark Ages had different clothing. But clothing could be passed down because before the Industrial Revolution, looms had to be by hand. Now, there was a bit of technological, shall we say, diversity within that. So that's not universally true. But by and large, things had to be spun by hand or by a spinning wheel. But when the Industrial Revolution came along and they started to revolutionize the looms, and they had the cotton mills and the linen mills, clothing was able to be mass produced. And with that mass production, and with the advent of synthetic dyes, we have a lot of different styles of clothing. But I don't suppose you've noticed anyone walking down the street wearing, say, a cloak, unless they're off to a Renaissance fair. We have different fashions. And the fashion of the 18th century with top hats and coattails, cravats, it's not there so much anymore. Now, we have suits, but we also have jeans and we have shirts and we have t-shirts. So what does this have to do with writing? Well, those same centuries and decades have different styles of writing. And depending on the decade you're in, people will say, this is the way to write. You must write like this. This is the only way to write. But if you look through history, you will see most certainly that it is not. Currently, there is an emphasis on minimalism. And there is also an emphasis on character-driven stories. Now, is this wrong? No. But is it right? That's debatable. But many people will tell you to write that way. Have you heard the expressions, show not tell? Well, that wasn't always the way. If you go back and you start reading other books from ye old time period, you will see that there's a lot of telling. And if you go and read books which have been translated from other languages, you will see different styles of storytelling. Now, of course, there are commonalities. But what does this have to do with the voice? Well, just because someone tells you to write minimalism, that does not necessarily mean that you're good at it. It does not also follow necessarily that that is what your voice is saying. Now, can you learn it? Absolutely. Most things can be learned. But that doesn't mean that it's natural. It doesn't mean that there is that flow. And flow is a very ambiguous word, but most writers, when they're in the flow, things feel right. They come together and it just works. And then, of course, there's this thing called writer's block, which kind of gets in the way of that. It blocks your flow. But I put to you, and again, this is somewhat controversial and not everybody's going to like it. Why should you follow fashion? Why not be countercultural? but not for its own sake, because you have a unique voice. Write with your voice. Write your voice. So if you feel that description comes naturally to you, write description. If you feel that plot comes naturally to you, write plot. You do not have to conform to current fashions. But there is a caveat with that. So don't mishear me. If you are countercultural, not everybody's going to like it. But congratulations, not everybody's going to like your work anyway. Even if you follow fashion, people are still going to reject it. But there is also this thing called extremes and taste. And everybody has their own taste. So you should be writing towards your target audience. And that may not actually be you. What you write, you may not even like. Hopefully you will. Hopefully you will write something that you will enjoy. But write towards your target audience. Write what they like. And there's this little thing called extremes, like I mentioned. And extremes, generally, it's not a good thing. For example, if you have too much tell and not enough show, it will be very dry. If you have too much show and not enough tell, it can become purple prose, which is overly floral, dramatic. That was the style of the 18th century. Very, very poetic style prose. But then say, take Beowulf or the Epic of Gilgamesh. That was more of epic poetry, or the Iliad, for example. Very different styles of writing to what we see now. And you could say that all of those are fantasy. Technically, it may not be the fantasy you're used to, but it's fantasy after a sort, or at least based on true events, some of it. But that's not contemporary fantasy. So be careful with what advice you're paying heed to, because it can cripple your writing and it can stop you before you even start. As a new, budding, aspiring writer, you have worked very hard on a piece and someone says, yeah, you should be showing, not telling. But should you? Should you really? Because while there is advice which is good, criticism that is good, healthy criticism, positive criticism, which will help you improve, you have to be careful which criticism you are accepting. Because if you are not careful, you will kill your own voice. And it is that voice which makes your writing unique, because you are taking your spoken voice, your inner voice, and you're translating it to text. You're putting it down as prose, you're putting it down as poetry. And how you read it, the words you write, it's never going to please everybody. But it will make a difference. Otherwise, everything is going to sound the same. And if everything is uniform, it is ever, ever so boring. I'm not saying don't use show, not tell. I'm not saying don't use minimalism. I'm saying find out what your unique voice is and write in it. And if that differs from the mainstream, that's okay. Write to your target audience. Write your voice. And tomorrow, I'm going to start on the world building series. And somewhere in between that, I'll put in something about faith. And the channel will come together, step by step, just like a novel, just like a short story, one step at a time. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, do like, do subscribe, do leave a comment, share it with a friend. Would love to know what you think. And if you need prayer for anything, do let us know. I hope you have a blessed day. Happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.